On your way to work? Maybe at the gym, or just taking a quick break from revision. Perfect, because in this deep dive, we'll look at one of the most realistic and important topics in management accounting: how businesses deal with risk and uncertainty when making decisions. We spend so much time in performance management studying these, well, predictable, controlled environments.
Absolutely. The textbook scenarios.
Yeah, exactly, where we use absorption costing, calculate standard variances, or figure out target costs right down to the penny, assuming everything's known.
Assuming all the inputs are stable and predictable.
But if you've ever actually worked in a real business, you know that's just not how it works.
Not at all. Reality is much messier.
The moment a manager commits capital, whether it's launching a new product or bidding on a contract or investing in new machinery,
They're committing resources now.
for an outcome that exists only in the future, a future we just can't see clearly.
An unknown future.
Yeah. So our goal today is really to move past those rigid, predictable methods. We want to truly dive deep into the strategic challenge of managing the unknown.
Getting into the nitty-gritty of it.
We're going to try and make these crucial performance management concepts around risk and uncertainty completely crystal clear for you.
And grounding the theory, the math, in how managers actually think and behave, that's key.
Right.
Because the core intellectual challenge here, I think, is understanding that almost every big strategic decision involves this trade-off. You spend money today.
For returns tomorrow that aren't guaranteed.
Exactly. They're unknown. The sources we look at really emphasize that decision-making is always about choices affecting future outcomes, which are, by definition, not known with certainty.
So it's not just about crunching numbers.
No, the real skill for a management accountant in this area isn't just calculating costs accurately. It's about structuring the problem itself. How do you even frame the decision when the future's foggy? And to structure that problem correctly, we absolutely have to start with the language, the terminology. Because in everyday conversation, we tend to use risk and uncertainty almost interchangeably, don't we?
Yeah, they feel like synonyms. It's a risky venture, the future is uncertain. Same difference, usually.
But in management accounting, and finance too, they are fundamentally distinct concepts. Really different.
And that difference dictates the tools you use.
Precisely. It tells you which analytical tools you can use or sometimes which ones you must use. So let's start with risk.
Okay, risk. What's the formal definition?
Risk exists when a decision maker knows that several possible outcomes could happen. That's the first part.
Okay, multiple possibilities. Still sounds a bit like uncertainty.
But here's the crucial element. In a risky environment, we can bring in statistics. We have some basis, maybe past experience, historical data, or industry averages.
So there's data.
Yes,
Gotcha.
and because of that data, the decision maker can actually estimate the probability, the likely occurrence of each potential future outcome.
Right. That's the key difference. Probabilities. You can assign a number to the likelihood.
Exactly. It's quantifiable likelihood.
So think of it like insurance, maybe, or even weather forecasting.
Perfect analogies. An insurance company doesn't know if your specific house will have a fire next year,
Hopefully not.
but they know, based on millions of data points over decades, that in your area, the probability of a major fire loss might be, say, 0.05%.
Right. It's a known percentage based on history.
Look, it's hard data.
Right.
And because those probabilities are known, they can confidently price the risk and issue a policy.
Got it.
And if we look at our running example one, with John, the manufacturer, deciding on the size of a fixed contract.
Right. He wasn't sure about the monthly demand.
Exactly. But he had historical figures. He knew, for instance, demand for 400 units has a 20% probability, or 0.2.
Okay.
And 500 units has a 30% probability, 0.3. Then 700 units, 40% probability, 0.4. And finally, 900 units has a 10% probability, 0.1.
And those probabilities add up to 100% or 1.0?
Critically, yes. They
Yeah.
cover all possibilities, and they're based on past data. Since those probabilities are known, we are operating squarely in the territory of risk. And because it's risk, we can use powerful mathematical tools, specifically the expected value calculation, to figure out the best decision, at least in the long run.
So that ability to assign a number, a probability, that's the real dividing line.
That's the intellectual boundary.
Mm.
When those probabilities exist, we're in a world where history or statistics offer some rules, some guidance.
Okay, so that's risk. What about the other side? Uncertainty.
Now we pivot to the much messier world. Uncertainty exists when the future is completely unknown. Just blank.
Completely unknown.
The decision maker has no past experience, no reliable data to base predictions on. This means probabilities cannot be assigned in any meaningful, objective way.
Wow. Okay, so this is truly the Wild West of management accounting, though.
That's a fantastic way to put it.
If risk is like playing poker where you know the odds of drawing an ace, uncertainty is like inventing a brand new card game on the spot and you don't even know how many cards are supposed to be in the deck.
That captures it perfectly. Imagine a company launching a product based on completely novel, maybe unproven technology. Say, the first affordable consumer quantum computer.
Right, no precedent.
You might hypothesize about high, medium, low demand scenarios. You can imagine them.
Sure.
But you can't look back at 10 years of data for similar products and say, historically, there's a 40% chance of high demand. That history simply doesn't exist.
So if the data is not there and you can't assign probabilities, how does a manager make a decision? I mean, are they just flipping a coin?
Well, that's where the human element, the behavioral aspect, really takes center stage.
Okay.
In this truly novel situation, under pure uncertainty, there's no single statistical rule, like expected value, that tells you the right answer.
So what do you rely on?
You're forced to rely not on statistical likelihoods, but on, well, defined approaches that are based primarily on the decision-maker's attitude towards the future.
Their personality or the company's culture.
Exactly. Their personality, the organization's culture, maybe their tolerance for disaster, their appetite for risk. This fundamental distinction, quantifiable risk versus behavioral uncertainty, is precisely why we have different sets of methods for dealing with each.
That makes perfect sense. So if the numbers, the probabilities fail us, we have to look inward at the people making the decision.
Precisely. Since pure uncertainty forces us away from purely mathematical answers, the specific approach a manager takes depends heavily on their personality, or, more formally, the company's overall attitude toward risk.
The company's stance.
Yes. And this is where management accounting starts to touch on behavioral economics, concepts like utility theory, although we don't need to go deep into that. But we can categorize managers into roughly 3 common attitudes.
Okay.
And these attitudes directly align with the decision-making approaches available when you're facing pure uncertainty, when probabilities are unknown.
Right, so the mindset dictates the method.
Exactly. First, let's meet the risk seeker. This manager often shows, well, intense optimism.
The eternal optimist.
They're interested primarily, maybe even only, in the best possible outcome. It doesn't matter how small the chance is that it might actually happen.
So they look at all the possible results.
They look at the payoff matrix, that table of potential profits, and their eyes go straight to the single biggest number, the maximum possible profit. That's their focus.
These are the ambitious entrepreneurs, maybe. The Silicon Valley types betting on the next big thing. Or maybe a new CEO brought in specifically to drive exponential growth.
That's the profile often. They see that possibility of, say, a $5.4 million profit in our example, and they think, that's the one I want.
Even if the worst case is a big loss.
They implicitly accept that the worst case scenario might be, say, a $1 million loss. But that potential loss is just collateral damage, you know. It's secondary to chasing that absolute peak return.
Their goal is maximizing value, often through aggressive growth, accepting the swings.
Yes, accepting high variance.
Yeah.
Their philosophy aligns perfectly with the decision method we call the maximax approach.
Maximax. Maximizing the maximum possible payoff. Makes sense.
Exactly. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, we have the risk avoider.
The cautious one.
Characterized by, yes, profound caution, maybe even pessimism. This manager makes decisions based almost entirely on the worst possible outcomes that might occur.
Okay, so they're looking at the downside.
Completely. They're driven by a need for protection. Protection against disaster. They want to know the highest possible financial floor they can stand on.
But why would a company deliberately turn down the chance at the highest profits? That seems counterintuitive for a business.
It often happens when the company is in a, shall we say, fragile position.
Okay.
Yeah.
Context, it matters.
Immensely. Perhaps they're highly leveraged, carrying a lot of debt. Maybe they're nearing insolvency. Or they operate in an industry like banking or pharmaceuticals where a single catastrophic loss could lead to immediate bankruptcy or severe regulatory penalties.
So for them, survival is more important than hitting a home run.
Survival outweighs expansion, absolutely. They are prioritizing managing the risk of ruin over maximizing potential gains. Their internal monologue is something like, what's the absolute worst that could happen with this choice? What's the lowest profit or biggest loss? And how do I make that worst-case outcome as least bad as possible,
Protect the downside at all costs.
which leads them directly to the Maximin approach.
Maximin, maximizing the minimum possible payoff. Got it.
They secure the best possible worst-case scenario. It guarantees a minimum level of return no matter what happens.
Okay, so we have the optimist, maximax, and the pessimist, maximin. Is there a middle ground?
There is, and that's the risk-neutral manager.
The balanced one?
The level-headed ones, yes. They aren't necessarily chasing the absolute best outcome, nor are they solely running from the absolute worst. They're more concerned with what's likely to happen on average, over the long run.
They're looking for the most likely or the, quote, average outcome.
That's the idea. This balanced approach naturally leads them towards using the expected value approach, if probabilities are available. Because EV mathematically represents the best average return over many repeated decisions.
Right, we said EV is for risk when probabilities are known.
Exactly. It's the rational choice for a manager who is making similar decisions repeatedly, like that insurance company pricing millions of policies. They don't care about the one outlier claim. They care about the consistent, predictable, average return over the whole portfolio.
So the big takeaway here seems to be that when you're dealing with pure uncertainty, no probabilities, the right answer isn't hidden in a statistical table somewhere.
No, it isn't.
It's found more in the boardroom discussions, right?
Yeah.
Dictated by the company's strategy, its financial health, its tolerance for things going wrong.
That's precisely it. The context and the culture drive the decision rule.
Okay, let's make this concrete. Let's apply these three mindsets, maximax, maximin, and the third one, minimax regret, to the practical reality of making a choice under uncertainty.
Good idea.
We can use the data points from John's situation in example 1. He's choosing a contract quantity 300, 500, 700, or 800 units, and for this exercise, let's assume he doesn't know the probabilities of demand. He just knows the possible profits for each combination.
Okay, so we have that payoff matrix. It shows all the potential profit outcomes depending on which contract size John chooses, the rows, versus what the actual market demand turns out to be, the columns.
Right. That matrix is our starting point.
It's the canvas for these uncertainty-based decisions. Let's start with approach 1, maximax, the optimist's choice.
The home run hitter.
Exactly. This one's probably the easiest to calculate because it only requires looking for the peak potential.
So the logic is, John looks at each decision option he has, each contract size. For each one, he finds the single biggest profit figure in that row.
The best possible outcome for that choice.
And then he just picks the option that had the highest of those bests.
Precisely. Max of the max. So looking across the rows in John's payoff table. 1. If John signs for 300 units, the very best profit he could possibly make, if demand turns out to be really high, 900 units, is $5,400.
Okay, $5,400 for the 300-unit option.
2. If he signs for 500 units, the best possible profit of that row is $5,000.
$5,000 for 500 units.
3. For the 700-unit contract, the maximum potential profit is $4,600.
$4,600 for 800.
And finally, if he signs for 800 units, the best outcome in that row is $4,400.
$4,400 for 800.
So the list of the maximum possible payoffs for each choice is $5,400, $5,000, $4,600, and $4,400.
And the maximax manager wants the maximum of these maximums.
Right, so they look at that list and pick the biggest number, which is $5,400.
Which came from the 300-unit contract option.
So the Maximax manager chooses the 300-unit contract. They do this because it offers the highest single potential profit achievable anywhere in the entire matrix. They're maximizing the possibility of that big win and essentially ignoring the potential downsides of that choice.
Okay. It definitely highlights the optimism, maybe bordering on reckless, depending on the situation. Let's flip to the complete opposite. Approach 2. Maximin, the pessimist's choice.
The safety-first approach.
How does the Maximin manager justify potentially sacrificing that $5,400 upside for safety?
Because for them, or for their company, the possibility of a really bad outcome, maybe even ruin, is a much greater threat than the disappointment of missing out on an extraordinary gain.
Survival first.
Survival first. Their logic flips the focus entirely away from the best outcomes. Instead, they look at every decision option, every row.
And they identify the minimum possible profit, the worst-case scenario for that specific choice.
Exactly. What's the floor for this contract size?
Okay, walk us through those minimums, still using John's data from example 1.
Certainly. We review the rows again, but this time we're only looking for the lowest number in each row. 1. If John signs for 300 units, his absolute worst-case payoff, if demand is low, is $2,900.
Minimum of $2,900 for the 300-unit choice.
2. If he signs for 500 units, the minimum profit in that row is $3,500.
$3,500 for 500 units.
3. For the 700-unit contract, the minimum payoff is $4,100.
$4,100 for 700.
And if he signs for 800 units, the minimum profit he can make is $4,400.
Minimum of $4,400 for 800 units.
So now our list isn't the maximums, it's the minimums. $2,900, $3,500, $4,100, and $4,400.
And the Maximin decision maker wants to maximize this set of minimums. Find the best of the worst.
Precisely. They look at that list of minimums and pick the highest one, which is $4,400.
Which came from the 800-unit contract option.
The Maximin manager chooses the contract for 800 units. By doing this, John ensures that even if the absolute worst demand scenario happens, the company's profit won't fall below that guaranteed floor of $4,400.
They prioritize stability, robustness, making sure the company can weather the storm.
Exactly. Protect the base.
Okay, Maximax and Maximin seem like polar opposites focused on profit extremes. Now that brings us to the third approach under uncertainty, which sounds the most, well, abstract maybe. Approach 3, minimax regret.
Yes. Minimax regret. It is a bit more complex conceptually. And you're right, in many ways it feels the most human.
Why human?
Because it's not directly about maximizing profit or ensuring survival. It's about avoiding future disappointment, avoiding that awful feeling of, if only I had chosen differently.
Avoiding second thoughts, basically.
Exactly. This method taps directly into that powerful psychological concept of opportunity cost, or what we formally call regret.
Okay, regret. How is it defined here?
In this context, regret is the calculated loss or missed opportunity suffered by choosing decision A, when, looking back after the fact, it turned out that decision B would have been the optimal choice for the actual market outcome that occurred.
So it's the difference between what could have been the best profit for that specific outcome and the profit you actually got.
Precisely that. It's the difference between the optimal payoff possible under a specific state of nature, like a particular demand level, and the payoff you actually achieved with the choice you made. It quantifies the ouch factor of making the wrong call.
Okay, so to use this minimax regret method, we can't just use the original payoff matrix with the profits. We need something else.
That's right. We have to first construct an entirely new matrix, the regret table.
A whole separate table just for regret values. How do we build that?
We build it column by column, one state of nature, one demand level at a time. So for every possible future demand level, each column in the original payoff matrix, you first scan down that column and find the single highest profit figure.
The best possible outcome for that specific demand level.
Yes. That highest profit represents the perfect choice if you had known that demand level was going to happen. It's the zero regret outcome for that column.
Okay, that's the benchmark for that column.
Then, for every other payoff in that same column, you subtract it from that optimal highest profit. The difference you calculate is the dollar value of the regret.
The opportunity cost. How much potential profit you left on the table by not making the perfect choice for that specific outcome.
Exactly. Let's walk through one specific demand scenario from John's example 1 to make it really clear. Let's assume, hypothetically, that the actual demand turns out to be 900 units. That's the last column in his table.
Okay, demand is 900. What's the first step?
Look down that 900-unit demand column in the original profit table. Find the highest profit number.
Okay, scanning down. The highest profit, if demand is 900 units, is $5,400.
Good. That $500 came from choosing the 300-unit contract, right?
Yes.
So $5,400 is our benchmark, our zero regret point for this specific 900-unit demand outcome. Now we calculate the regret for each choice John could have made. If John had chosen the 300-unit contract, the optimal one for this outcome, his profit was $5,400. His regret is $5,400, which equals $0. Makes sense.
Zero regret for the perfect choice.
If he had chosen the 500-unit contract instead, his profit was $5,000. The regret is the optimal $5,400 minus his actual $5,000, which is $400 in missed opportunity.
If he'd chosen the 700-unit contract, profit was $4,600. Regret is $5,400 minus $4,600, $800.
$800 regret. And if he'd chosen the 800-unit contract, profit was $4,400. Regret is $5,400 minus $4,400 equals $1,000.
$1,000 regret for that choice if demand hit 900.
Right. And we repeat this exact process, find the max profit in the column, then subtract each actual profit from that max for every single column, every demand level in the original payoff table.
Until you filled out a whole new table, the regret table, full of these opportunity cost numbers.
Exactly. And all the numbers in the regret table would be 0 or positive. You can't have negative regret.
Okay, so now we have this detailed regret table. How does the manager actually use it to make the final decision? What's the logic now?
Now the manager looks at their regret table row by row. For each decision option, each contract size row, they scan across and identify the maximum possible regret that could occur if they choose that option.
So for each choice, they ask, what's the absolute worst regret, the biggest dough moment I could experience if I pick this contract size?
That's precisely the question. This identifies the worst potential retrospective error, the biggest what if I'd done differently, associated with each possible decision.
And the final step, what's the minimax part?
The minimax regret manager then looks at that list of maximum regrets, one maximum regret value for each decision row, and chooses the decision option that has the minimum value in that list.
Minimize the maximum regret. Got it.
They are not trying to maximize profit here. They're explicitly trying to choose the option that results in the smallest possible worst-case regret.
They want to avoid being the person who has to explain 6 months later why their decision led to a massive, easily avoidable loss of opportunity compared to what could have been.
You've nailed the psychology. It's a defensive strategy in many ways. It appeals to managers who might be under intense scrutiny.
Because they can defend the decision later by saying, look, based on the information we had, I chose the option that specifically minimized the potential for the largest possible error or missed opportunity.
Exactly. It's a justification based on minimizing downside error. Applying this to John's finalized regret table from example 1, if he chooses the 300-unit contract, the maximum regret he could face under a different demand scenario is $1,500.
Max regret $1,500 for 300 units.
For the 500-unit contract, the maximum regret is $900.
$900 for 500 units.
For the 700-unit contract, the maximum regret is $800.
$800 for 700 units.
And for the 800-unit contract, the maximum regret is $1,000.
$1,000 for 800 units.
So the list of maximum possible regrets is $1,500, $900, $800, and $1,000.
And the minimax regret manager chooses the option with the minimum number in that list,
Which is $800.
corresponding to the 700-unit contract.
Correct. So the minimax regret manager would choose the 700-unit contract. Why? Because the $800 maximum regret associated with that choice is the lowest maximum level of potential disappointment. It provides a kind of psychological comfort by hedging against making the single largest possible mistake, even if other options might have offered higher potential profits or a higher guaranteed minimum.
Okay, so those three maximax, Maximin, minimax, regret are the main tools for dealing with pure uncertainty, where we have no probabilities.
That's right. They're driven by attitude.
Now, let's transition back. Let's bring probabilities back into the picture. We're now dealing with risk.
Back to where we can use statistics.
And the primary tool here, as you mentioned earlier, is the expected value method, or EV.
Yes, expected value is really the cornerstone of what we'd call rational decision-making under risk. It's fundamentally an attempt to strip out the behavioral element, the optimism or pessimism, and find the pure mathematical long-run average return.
Okay, how does it calculate that average?
Well, for any single decision option you're considering, the EV calculation involves 2 steps for each possible outcome. You take the financial payoff of that outcome,
Like the profit John makes if demand is 500 units.
and you multiply it by the probability of that specific outcome occurring.
Which John knows now, like the 0.3 probability for 500 units.
Exactly. You do that multiplication, payoff times probability, for every possible outcome linked to that decision. Then you simply sum all those results together.
Add up all the probability-weighted payoffs for that choice.
And that final sum, that composite result, is the expected value, the statistically expected return for that specific decision option.
The power of EV, then, is that it gives you this balanced, weighted average. It reflects both the good and bad outcomes and how likely they are.
Precisely. It tells you what profit you should expect to achieve, on average, if you could repeat this exact decision with these exact probabilities many, many times over. It's the law of large numbers in action.
So it's the perfect tool for that risk-neutral manager we talked about, the one who just wants consistency and the best average performance over time.
It is indeed the rational choice for a risk-neutral decision maker.
So going back to example 1 last time, John now knows the probabilities for demand, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.1. He calculates the EV for each of his potential contract sizes, 300, 500, 700, 800 units.
Yes, he'd calculate 4 separate EVs.
And the result in the example shows that the highest expected value, the best average dollar return, ends up being $4,500.
That's correct.
And that $4,500 EV corresponds to choosing the 700-unit contract.
Right. So the purely rational, risk-neutral manager looks at those 4 EV calculations, sees $4,500 as the highest, and chooses the 700-unit contract. They ignore the extreme possibilities focused on by maximax or maximin and just go with the best average.
Okay, EV seems very logical, very mathematical. It feels like it should be the default best way if you have probabilities.
It's incredibly popular, and it is mathematically sound, especially for decisions that are repeated frequently. But, and this is a really crucial insight for any performance management student, despite its mathematical appeal and its widespread use, the standard expected value approach has 2 serious, well-documented limitations.
Okay. Limitations the examiners expect us to know.
Absolutely. You need to be aware of them because they explain why, in the real world, managers might sometimes reject the decision with the highest EV. It's not always the end of the story.
Right. This is where we need to look beyond just the textbook calculation. What are these limitations that might make a manager pause?
Okay, the first major limitation is that expected value completely ignores the variance or dispersion of the possible outcomes.
Variance. You mean how spread out the results might be?
Exactly. The EV figure is only an average. It tells you the central point, but it provides 0 information about the potential spread around that average. It doesn't tell you how risky, in the everyday sense, the project actually is.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure, a classic illustration. Imagine a company is choosing between 2 projects, Project Alpha and Project Beta. After careful analysis, they calculate that both projects have an expected value of, say, $10 million profit.
Okay. Identical EVs. So based purely on EV, they're indifferent.
Based purely on EV, yes. But now look deeper. Project Alpha's potential returns are tightly clustered. They range only from a $9.5 million profit to a $10.5 million profit. Very stable, very predictable, low variance.
Okay. See.
Project Beta, however, has wildly different potential outcomes. Its returns range from a catastrophic $50 million loss at one extreme to a massive $70 million gain at the other, high variance.
Wow. Okay. Mathematically, the average EV is the same, $10 million for both. But strategically, they are worlds apart.
Worlds apart. If you're managing a stable utility company, Project Alpha looks perfect, predictable, safe.
Right.
But if you're, say, a high-stakes venture capital fund with an extreme tolerance for risk, maybe Project Beta is acceptable, even attractive because of the huge upside.
But the EV calculation itself doesn't show that difference in risk profile.
Not at all. It treats them as identical. Now think about the implication. If that $50 million loss in Project Beta, even has a low probability, is enough to bankrupt the company.
Then the EV is irrelevant. You can't average your way out of bankruptcy.
Precisely. A manager must consider that potential catastrophic outcome. They might have to ignore the high EV of Project Beta simply because the company cannot survive that worst-case scenario. The standard EV calculation implicitly assumes the company can absorb any outcome, which just isn't always true in reality.
Okay, so limitation 1. EV ignores the spread, the risk, the variance. What's the second limitation?
The second limitation is directly related back to that human element we discussed earlier. Expected value ignores the manager's or the company's utility function.
Utility function. Sounds technical.
It basically means how much value or satisfaction someone gets from money. In simple terms, standard EV calculation assumes that all managers are perfectly risk neutral.
Meaning?
Meaning it assumes the value or utility they get from an extra dollar of profit is always the same. The difference between $0 and $1 million profit feels the same as the difference between $10 million and $11 million profit.
But that doesn't feel right intuitively. Surely the first million is way more impactful if you have nothing.
Exactly. We know from behavioral economics and just common sense, that isn't true for most people or companies. For a manager whose company is teetering on the edge of bankruptcy,
Yeah.
the utility, the sheer relief and value gained from avoiding a $1 million loss is almost certainly far, far greater than the utility or excitement gained from achieving an extra $1 million profit if they were already doing well.
The value of money isn't linear. Avoiding disaster feels more important than incremental gain sometimes.
Especially when survival is at stake. So if a manager is risk-averse, which many are, particularly in established companies,
They'll overweight the potential losses.
yes, they will mentally or even formally, through utility theory, discount the value of those very high potential payoffs in the EV calculation, and they'll prioritize minimizing the chance of major losses.
Which means they might deliberately choose a project with a lower mathematically calculated EV if it feels safer.
Absolutely. A risk-averse company might choose a project with a $4 million EV over one with a $4.5 million EV if that higher EV project carries even a small but potentially fatal risk of bankruptcy, whereas the lower EV project guarantees solvency.
So even when we have probabilities and can calculate EV, the story isn't over.
Not at all. These limitations exist because standard EV fails to incorporate the company's specific financial circumstances, its ability to absorb losses, and the real-world risk attitudes of its managers. It proves that even the most rigorous mathematical tool needs to be tempered by strategic judgment and context.
Okay, so expected value is great, with caveats for single one-off decisions under risk, like John choosing one contract size.
Yeah,
But in the real world, business decisions often aren't just one choice. They happen in sequence, right? You do A, then something happens, then based on that, you decide between B or C.
that's very common. Multi-stage decisions.
So how do we handle expected value when the choices are layered like that? Over time, it seems like it could get complicated fast.
It can indeed get complicated. And that's exactly where the power of decision trees comes in. They're designed specifically for this.
Okay, decision trees. What are they, fundamentally?
Fundamentally, a decision tree is just a diagram, a visual representation of the various alternatives, the chance events, and the outcomes that unfold sequentially over time.
Like a flowchart for decisions.
Very much like a flowchart, yes. It allows us to map out these complex multi-stage problems and helps ensure we're applying the logic of expected value correctly at every single step along the chain. Think of it as the manager's roadmap through a potentially confusing financial labyrinth.
What does this roadmap look like? What are the key components?
The structure is actually quite simple, but it's visually very powerful. We use two main types of symbols, or nodes. One, we use decision nodes, usually drawn as squares. These represent points in time where the manager has to make a choice, where they have control, like deciding whether to launch a product or sign a contract or spend money on research.
Squares mean we choose.
Exactly. An action is taken, often involving a cost or investment. Two. Then we have chance nodes, usually drawn as circles. These represent points where the outcome is uncertain, determined by probability, outside the manager's direct control.
Circles mean fate decides.
Fate, or the market, or test results, yes. Things like whether market demand will be high or low, whether a research survey comes back positive or negative, or what the general economic conditions will be. Branches coming out of a circle have probabilities attached.
Okay, squares for choices, circles for chances. How does putting them together help?
By linking these squares and circles in sequence, left to right, we can visually trace all the possible paths that a sequence of decisions and events could take.
You can see the whole cascade of possibility.
Precisely. And importantly, we can write the financial implications, the costs of decisions, the payoffs from outcomes onto the branches or at the endpoints. This allows us to calculate the expected monetary value, or EMV, for different stages of the tree.
EMV, same idea as EV, just in the context of a tree.
Essentially, yes. Expected monetary value. It allows us to evaluate entire strategic sequences, not just single choices.
Where would this be particularly useful?
Decision trees are especially helpful for decisions involving what we call imperfect knowledge. This comes up a lot in practice.
Imperfect knowledge, meaning you can get more information, but it's not guaranteed to be 100% accurate.
Exactly that. Market research is a classic example. It can give you better insights, reduce uncertainty, but it's never a perfect crystal ball.
And example 2 in our materials about commute, considering office refurbishment, seems to illustrate this.
It's a perfect illustration. Combiplec is facing a big decision about refurbishment, but they're unsure about the potential returns. Their initial decision, the very first square node on the tree, is whether to spend $200,000 on market research before committing to the main project.
Okay, so step 1. Do the research, cost $200K, or skip the research, cost $0. That's the first square.
Exactly. Now let's follow the do the research branch. Spending that $200 immediately leads them not to another decision, but to a chance node to circle.
The outcome of the research.
Right. The research result will be either good or poor. Those are the two branches coming out of the circle, each with a probability.
Okay.
Then, crucially, based on whichever result they get, good or poor, the manager faces a second decision node, another square.
Ah, another choice point after seeing the research.
Yes. Now they have to decide, should we proceed with the really expensive refurbishment, costing $4 million, or go for the cheaper refurbishment, $2 million cost, or maybe based on the research, abandon the project entirely, cost $0.
I see how it maps the sequence, but what makes the tree essential here? Couldn't you just think through that logic?
You could try, But the tree makes handling the probabilities, especially the conditional probabilities, much clearer and less prone to error.
Right, conditional probability. That's often the trickiest part for students. Can you elaborate on how the tree handles that imperfect knowledge aspect?
Sure, conditional probability here means the result of the market research actually changes the assessed likelihood of the final market outcome, high demand versus low demand. We're using principles related to Bayes' theorem, essentially updating our beliefs based on new evidence.
So the research isn't perfect, but it shifts the odds.
It's just the odds. For instance, maybe the general market probability of achieving a good final result, high demand, was estimated at 50% before doing any research.
Okay, the baseline probability.
But the market research team tells Combi, our research isn't perfect, but it's pretty good. If our survey specifically comes back indicating a good result,
Yes.
then the updated probability of the actual final market outcome being good jumps from 60% up to 91%.
So the research result modifies the probability you use for the next chance node down the line?
Precisely. And conversely, if the research indicates poor, the probability of the actual outcome being good might drop significantly, maybe down to 30%.
The tree structure helps you keep track of which probability applies where, depending on the path taken.
Exactly. It visually unpacks that whole chain of events.
Hmm.
The initial cost of the research, $200. The chance result of the survey, good, poor. The subsequent decision, expensive, cheap, abandon. The updated probability of the final market outcome, good, poor, based on the research. And finally, the ultimate payoffs, like the big returns, $13.5 million or $6.5 million, or losses associated with each final branch.
Okay, the map is built. It shows all the paths, costs, probabilities, and payoffs. How does the manager actually use the tree to make the final recommendation? Do they start reading it from left to right?
No, and this is key. You evaluate a decision tree by working backwards, from right to left.
Backwards, from the future outcomes.
Yes, it's often called the rollback technique or backward induction. You start at the far right-hand side of the tree at the final outcomes and their financial payoffs.
Oh.
You then move leftwards to the first nodes you encounter, which will usually be chance nodes, circles. At each chance node, you calculate the expected monetary value, EMV, by multiplying the payoff of each branch by its probability and summing them up. You write that calculated EMV at the circle node.
So you collapse the probabilities at the chance nodes first.
Yes. Then you continue rolling back to the left until you hit a decision node, a square. Now, at a decision node, the manager is assumed to be rational and wants to maximize value.
So they'll choose the best option available at that point.
Exactly. They look at the EMVs calculated for the branches immediately following that square, which you just calculated by rolling back from the right. They will choose the one branch that offers the highest EMV.
And they effectively discard the other options from that square.
Yes, you conceptually prune the suboptimal branches. You write the highest EMV from the chosen branch at the square node.
And you just keep doing this. Roll back, calculate EMV at circles, choose max EMV at squares, all the way back to the very first decision.
All the way back to the initial decision node on the far left of the tree. For CombiPlec, this would be the square representing do research versus don't do research.
So, by rolling back completely, Combi can compare the net expected value of the entire do research path, which would be the EMV calculated at that branch minus the initial $200K research cost.
Versus the net expected value of the don't do research path, which would be calculated based on the original 60% probability of success.
And they just choose whichever path has the higher overall net EMV at the very start.
That's the process. The tree allows CombiPlec not only to structure the complex decision, but also to place a specific quantitative value on the benefit of obtaining that imperfect market research information.
That's really powerful. And actually, the ability to put a specific dollar value on getting information, even imperfect information, that leads perfectly into our final analytical tool, doesn't it?
It does indeed. It sets up the idea of valuing certainty itself.
So let's revisit that ultimate hypothetical question we touched on earlier. How much is knowing the future actually worth?
The ultimate what if.
If John, from example 1, could somehow buy a perfect crystal ball, a totally reliable source of perfect knowledge that told him exactly what the demand level was going to be each month before he had to sign that fixed quantity contract.
If he could eliminate uncertainty completely.
What's the absolute maximum price he should logically be willing to pay for that perfect foresight? Is there a way to calculate that?
There is. And that theoretical maximum price is precisely what we call the value of perfect information, or VPI.
Okay, VPI, what does it represent?
It quantifies the upper limit, the maximum amount a company or a decision maker would rationally be prepared to pay to obtain perfect knowledge about a future uncertainty, ensuring they could always make the optimal choice after the fact.
So it's the value of removing uncertainty entirely from a specific decision. How is it calculated?
The VPI is calculated quite simply as the difference between two specific expected values. 1. The expected return you could achieve with the benefit of perfect knowledge. 2. Compared to the best expected return you could achieve without perfect knowledge, which is usually the highest EV you could get using standard analysis under risk.
Okay, let's break down that first part. The expected return with perfect knowledge. How do we figure that out? The whole point is we don't normally have perfect knowledge.
It's a theoretical calculation, imagining you did. If John has perfect knowledge each month, he's no longer dealing with risk when he chooses the contract size. He knows the demand level for sure.
Right, so he doesn't need to worry about the probabilities, 0.2, 0.3, etc., when choosing. He just reacts to the known demand.
Exactly. So calculating the expected return with perfect knowledge involves a straightforward three-step thought process. Step 1. Identify the optimal payoff for each possible state of nature. Look back at the original payoff matrix. For every possible future state, in John's case, demand levels 400, 500, 700, 900, you go down that column and identify the single highest profit figure achievable.
This represents the profit John would make for that demand level if he knew it was coming and chose the best possible contract size just for that specific outcome.
Precisely. So using example 1 data, if John knew demand was definitely going to be 900 units next month, he would look down the 900 column, see $5,400 as the max profit, and know to choose the 300-unit contract to achieve it.
Okay.
If he knew demand was going to be 500 units, he'd look down that column, see $4,500 as the max, and know to choose the 500-unit contract. He always selects the absolute best choice row for that specific known outcome column. You find this best profit for each possible demand level.
Got it. You have a list of the best possible profits for each scenario. What's step 2?
Step 2. Calculate the expected value of these optimal payoffs. Now, you take that list of optimal profits you just identified, one for each demand level, and now you bring the original probabilities back in. You weight each of those optimal profits by the probability of that specific demand level occurring, 0.2 for 400 units, 0.3 for 500, etc.
Oh, so you're calculating the average profit you'd expect to make if you always had the crystal ball and could always react perfectly.
That's exactly what it is. You sum up those probability-weighted optimal profits. This gives you the theoretical expected return with perfect information. In John's case, following this process with his numbers, this figure calculates out to $4,800.
Okay, $4,800 represents the absolute maximum average profit John could possibly hope to achieve from this contract situation, even with a perfect forecast every single time. It's the theoretical ceiling.
It is. Now for step 3. Calculate the VPI itself. This is the easiest step. You simply compare that theoretical maximum return, $4,800, to the best result John could achieve without the crystal ball.
Which we already worked out earlier using standard expected value.
Correct. We did. Back in section 4, we found that the highest standard EV John could achieve, dealing with the known probabilities but without perfect foresight, was $4,500 by choosing the 700-unit contract.
Okay.
So the value of perfect information, VPI, is the difference. $4,800, the average return with perfect knowledge, minus $4,500, the best average return achievable without it.
$4,800, $4,500 equals $300.
$300. That is the value of perfect information for this specific decision scenario.
And what does that $300 actually mean in practical terms for John?
It means that John should rationally never pay more than $300 for any kind of market research, consulting advice, forecasting service, or any intelligence gathering related to predicting next month's demand for this specific contract decision.
Why not?
Because even if that information source turned out to be miraculously 100% accurate, truly perfect, the absolute maximum extra average profit he could expect to gain from having it, compared to just using his existing EV analysis, is capped at $300.
So the VPI provides a hard quantitative ceiling on how much it's worth spending to reduce or eliminate uncertainty in a particular decision.
Precisely. It helps managers make sensible decisions about whether investing in more information is actually cost-effective. If someone offers John a forecast for $500, VPI tells him it's mathematically not worth it, even if the forecast promises perfection. So bringing all these concepts together, especially for those of you studying for the performance management exam, it's really important to remember something. Calculating maximax, maximin, minimax regret, and EV, those are, at the end of the day, mechanical steps. You learn the rules, you apply them to the numbers in the table.
The calculation part is practice.
It's practice. But the true managerial insight, and honestly, often the difference between getting a high mark and just scraping by in an exam question on this topic, that lies in the rationale, in explaining why you recommend one approach over the others in a given situation.
It's not just about getting the numbers right, but interpreting them in context.
Absolutely. The final choice a company makes isn't just about which calculation gives the biggest number according to one rule. It needs to be a direct reflection of the organization's current strategic reality, as described in the exam scenario.
So you need to read the story in the question carefully.
Critically, you must think logically about which risk attitude and therefore which decision approach best fits the company described in the scenario.
So, for example, if the question vignette describes the company as being, say, cash-rich, maybe venture capital-backed, aggressive in its market, or explicitly aiming for market leadership.
Then you should immediately recognize that they likely have a high tolerance for risk. They might be risk seekers.
And your recommendation?
Your recommendation should probably lean towards the maximax approach. You'd perform the maximax calculation, identify the choice it points to, but then, crucially, you must justify it by explicitly stating that this choice aligns with the company's stated focus on maximizing shareholder wealth through pursuing breakthrough profits, even if it carries risk.
Connect the method to the company's profile.
Always. Conversely, what if the scenario describes, say, a small family-run business, or a company explicitly mentioned as facing liquidity problems or having high debt, or maybe one operating in a sector under really strict regulatory oversight where mistakes are costly?
That paints a very different picture,
Yeah.
much more cautious.
Exactly. In that case, you must adopt the cautious, risk-averse perspective. The maximum calculation then becomes your primary tool.
And the justification focuses on survival.
Yes. You justify the maximum choice by explaining that it prioritizes the company's need for stability, or guarantees minimum survival levels, or protects against potentially ruinous outcomes, aligning with the company's likely fragile position or low-risk appetite. It's about securing that necessary financial floor.
What about justifying expected value, if probabilities are given?
Even when you use expected value because probabilities are available, your justification needs to acknowledge those limitations we discussed.
Right, the variance and utility issues.
Yes. If you recommend the option with the highest EV, you should explicitly state something like, this recommendation assumes the manager is risk neutral and that the business has the financial capacity to withstand the potential range of outcomes, variance, associated with this project.
Show the examiner you know EV isn't always the full story.
Exactly. You need to demonstrate that you understand why a real-world manager might sometimes reject the highest EV project due to risk aversion or the potential for unacceptable losses. That awareness shows deeper understanding.
So the task in an exam isn't just to calculate 4 different answers based on 4 different rules.
Not at all.
It's really about providing a coherent management rationale for the single recommendation you make, explicitly linking the strategic context given in the scenario directly to your chosen decision method and its implications.
That's the higher-level skill being tested.
You know, this entire deep dive really highlights something fundamental about performance management, doesn't it? At its highest level, it seems less about precise arithmetic.
Although the arithmetic needs to be right.
Right, but it's more about strategy, about understanding management psychology, and about developing frameworks for managing ambiguity.
Well put. You simply cannot escape that inherent tension between the nice, clean, predictable world of numbers on a spreadsheet
and the messy, uncertain, unpredictable reality of the future where the actual outcomes happen.
Exactly. And the tools we've discussed today, Maximax for the optimist, Maximin for the pessimist, minimax for regret for avoiding big mistakes, expected value for the long-run average, decision trees for mapping sequences, and VPI for valuing certainty. These are essentially the structured frameworks managers use to try and bridge that gap, to make logical, defensible decisions in the face of that ambiguity.
So there are tools for thinking as much as calculating.
Very much so. And ultimately, I think mastering this chapter for your exams and for your career means deeply understanding that almost every significant business decision commits valuable resources now based on imperfect information about the future. The successful manager and the successful management accountant advising them is the one who can intelligently choose and apply the decision framework that best aligns with the organization's specific risk tolerance and its overarching strategic goals.
Ensuring the firm not only makes good bets, but also survives long enough to see those bets pay off.
That's the name of the game. Managing risk and uncertainty effectively is fundamental to long-term success.
And that's risk and uncertainty, definitely one of the most realistic and I think interesting parts of management accounting because, well, real life is never perfectly predictable. If this deep dive helped you understand how accountants and managers think under pressure when facing the unknown, subscribe to the SmartPass YouTube channel for more ACCA performance management audio lessons they're perfect for when you're on the move.